we should be on track.
Oh, yeah. Gosh darn it. Well, we tried to incorporate it.
Okay, you've got a copy in front of you on 2017-161. I passed on a copy to everybody. You should have a copy of it. So as soon as we get started, we will. Hi, Dan.
So we'll want to move.
Okay, let's go around the table and dare ourselves for the record. We'll start with you, John.
John Weddleton.
Pete Peterson. Dick Traney.
Forrest Dunbar.
Tim.
Brett Joyce.
Okay. And Eric's floating around here somewhere. So as soon as they get ready, we'll start this one. Boulder has a little slide to show in here. So. Didn't we give you a resolution last night because you're retiring?
I was hoping I was going to be out of here before this. But I'm back again. One last program.
One last hurrah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. You just can't retire. And thank you very much. That was so special last night. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks for your service to the city.
You bet.
There's a rumor that some people like you.
Maybe a little person or two, yeah. But when you're here long enough, that happens.
Mostly it goes the other way.
Yeah, the longer you're here.
That's my testimony. Not me.
They want your job.
They're well gone.
We've been joined by Chris Constant. I apologize for the body. We just had another meeting that ran over, so we had no choice. If you want. There's not. Don't forget we do have meetings tomorrow too, but there's nothing on Friday.
This is the holiday season.
Tomorrow's a big meeting.
There's a bunch of them tomorrow. You bring it up.
It's 11. No community and economic development committee anymore.
See, I've got budget and finance committee. That's at noon.
Enterprise and utility.
Enterprise is gone, so we had enterprise, but it's gone now. So. Just the one. Sorry for causing panic. And you had shopping yet to do, don't you?
I went to the back.
I'm sorry. What do we have tomorrow? Oh my God.
We have budget and finance at noon. That's the thing we've got now, because enterprise activities got canceled.
Say it again?
Enterprise activities got canceled.
Okay.
So just budget and finance at noon.
What are we going to do in that meeting? Do we pass the budget?
Yes, but we always need to be updated on the fiscal situation of the city, Fred. Call in if you want. This is a long drive from where you're at.
I really don't think I need to be updated, but thanks.
I thought we were
Okay,
having
Dan?
a station, a committee of the whole.
It is a committee of the whole. Deanne, ma'am, go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for having us. We're here to talk about the proposed changes to the Clean Air Ordinance. My name is Deanne Fetco. I'm the Deputy Director at the Anchorage Health Department, and we have with us Chris Salerno, who is our resident expert on air quality and air quality specialist. Thank you for honoring him last night for his 23 years and 9 months at the municipality of Anchorage. We're thrilled to have him take us through these changes, and please feel free to ask questions as we go along. We've provided a packet here with the presentation as well as the ordinance and associated documents. And then at the back, we also have an amendment number 1 that we'll be talking about through the presentation.
So Deanne made mention that you can ask questions during the presentation. I was going to say, why don't you hold your questions till January 2nd? But
Is there something happening by that time?
okay. All right, so this is a short program. We only have 12 slides, ask questions throughout. And our whole goal here is to give you an overview of the air quality new code that we put together. And it's been worked over for the last couple of years, and we're getting very close to the end. And if we can work out our nuances today, that would be super. And I'll keep it short, and then we'll have the discussion afterwards, okay? So proposed revisions to the municipal clean air ordinance. And so our air quality code is included in Title 15 environmental protection, and there are a total of 10 chapters in Title 15. Air quality is subject to 2 of these chapters. Other chapters address public nuisances and noise control and that type of thing. So why update the clean air code? And I'm just going to read this one because this is the meat and potatoes of the presentation. And so we'll start with eliminate references to the defunct South Central Clean Air Authority Commission, which is a mouthful, so I'm just going to refer to it as the commission from now on. And we want to revise the administrative hearing and appeals procedures so that they are directed to the municipal administrative hearing officer rather than to the commission. We want to eliminate air permitting and source registration requirements that are largely duplicative with ADEC requirements. Make housekeeping changes that eliminate unnecessary provisions in the code. Add new capacity rate requirements for wood stoves and fireplaces that are enforceable and help Anchorage avoid possible violations of the federal clean air standards for fine particulates, which is 2.5. And that is particulates of less than 2.5 microns in diameter. And wood smoke is proposed of about 60% fines, or 2.5. We want to update burn provisions to the current code practices and simplify by consolidating the clean air code into one chapter in Title 15 instead of 2. And just to let you know, there have been major changes in the staffing at the air quality program. I'm the last Mohican. Hopefully we're going to have somebody new on board in January 2018. We used to have 5 people on staff. We're down to 1 FTE. And this new code is streamlined to give new tools and simplify enforcement. So what was the commission? It was created in 1970. And before I even say that, this overhaul is long overdue, and I'm glad we're addressing it now, finally. So the commission was very valuable for the South Central Airshed. It was created in the 70s. Last meeting was in the 90s and sunsetted by Anchorage Assembly in 2011. It addressed topics such as open burning at Port McKenzie when they were clearing all that area out there for dairies, and the IM program expansion into the Mat-Su. The Mat-Su Borough Code of Ordinances still has references to the commission on the books in Chapter 8 of their code. I spoke with the borough folks last summer who were ready to remove the commission off the books, as we were also about to do with the passage of this new code. So the commission's responsibilities in the current code, such as hearing appeals, advising mayors, and holding public hearings in the current code, have been transitioned into the new code. And the new code defines the director as the director of the Department of Health and Human Services. The proposed code will move appellate jurisdiction from the commission to the municipal administrative hearing officer. And redirecting appellate jurisdiction was a primary impetus for revising the code. New cases will be taken to the administrative hearing officer.
By the way, thanks to Assembly, we did make the hearing officer full-time. So even though you see we've added more things, now they have the time to do it.
Okay.
Please continue.
Okay, thank you. So the proposed code will eliminate municipal air permitting and source registration requirements. Examples of sources that ADEC permits are electrical generation facilities, large incinerators, asphalt batch plants. The air quality program currently has only one FTE. An effective permitting program would require staff fully engaged in federal rules pertaining to permits, capable of performing dispersion modeling and complex engineering calculations. An effective permitting program requires several expert staff immersed in their respective specialties. At this point, DHS permits the Alaska Railroad for operation of their once smoky diesel fuel boilers. They have upgraded to natural gas-fired boilers at the rail yard in Ship Creek, and the emissions are dramatically reduced. NTEC is a small incinerator used to dispose of hospital-generated waste. Neither of these two sources currently meet thresholds triggering the requirement for ADEC permit. However, ADEC may permit NTEC in the future. Several sections of the code have been eliminated because they are unnecessary or the responsibility of ADEC. The municipal attorneys have advised us, as an example, in the current code, voluntary compliance is totally unnecessary and has been removed, and ADEC is responsible for municipal source permitting, making MOA permitting redundant. The current code sets standards on how much particulate and sulfur dioxide can be emitted by a stationary source. Compliance with these limits can only be assessed through source testing. This has not been performed as a consequence of municipal action in at least 35 years, perhaps never. If this were deemed necessary, it almost certainly be applied by a source under the jurisdiction of ADEC. New code will add new opacity limitations for wood stoves and fireplaces. This change gives an objective tool to the enforcement officials. 20% opacity limitations are already in the code for wood boilers. Opacity, as you can see in this slide, opacity is the degree to which emissions reduce the transmission of light and obscure the view of an object in the background. It is measured using EPA Method 9, and so we would go and have our eyeballs calibrated twice a year. And as you can see again in this slide, the mass emissions from the wood burning device, from this perspective, 100% opacity would correlate to the center of the hillside in the background, which the smoke is totally obscuring. The proposed code will set a 20% opacity limit for wood stoves and fireplaces. Fairbanks has already instituted a 20% limit. And note in this graph is a graph of PM 2.5 trends for the last 16 years. The y-axis is in the micrograms per cubic meter. There are two standards for PM 2.5. The black line is the annual average of 12 micrograms per cubic meter, and the red line is the 24-hour PM 2.5 standard, the NAC standard. I guess my heading's been short. Sorry about that. They're on my slide here, though. Also note, there is a 20-minute grace period to start and an aggregate of 6 minutes per hour when the 20% capacity limit can be exceeded. And please note the Alaska statute requires local governments to prove that any emission limitations that are more stringent than the state's is justified on the basis of meteorology and is technically and economically feasible. So the DHHS completed a rigorous process of justifying the 20% opacity standard, which was peer-reviewed by experts in the field and approved by the Commissioner of ADEC in August of 2014. And just to let you know, we did have an exceedance for PM 2.5 at a neighborhood monitoring site at Garden this last winter, January 8th. And as you see the trends slide here, we generally are well below the national ambient air quality standards, but with more wood-burning devices in neighborhoods, if they're improperly operated or burning wet wood, it could be trouble for our standard and exceedances.
Mr. Dunbar has a question for you, sir.
Yes, of course.
Oh, this is for the end of the presentation.
Okay, go ahead, sir.
So the current code is subjective and difficult to enforce. So I'll read this to you because I read it too. So lots of people over the 24 years that I've been working here, and I've hung my hat on this code reference. No person shall cause, allow, or permit the emission of any contaminant or water vapor, including but not limited to odorous matter that tends to be injurious or to adversely affect human health, safety, or welfare, animal or plant life, or property, or interferes with the normal use and enjoyment of life, property, and business. So adding an opacity limit will make determining whether wood stove or fireplaces is in compliance much clearer. Removal of open burn season locations, burn barrel operations. The MOA has a hodgepodge of open burn seasons and locations across the city. This revision strengthens fire mitigation strategies by reducing the possibility of open burning becoming a wildland fire. There is no open burning or burned barrels allowed in the municipality at this time.
Say that again?
There's no open burning allowed in the city of Anchorage at the current time. In spite of the fact there was an article in the newspaper that a fire official told a homeless camp they could burn the camp, if I remember correctly, Chief, and you said that's not correct. You cannot have an open burning fire in any homeless camp. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Is there a distinction between the city and the municipality?
No, sir. Municipality-wide.
Mr. Chair.
Now,
75 to Connect Bridge.
now,
Well, they had a wood stove. It wasn't an open burn. It was actually a contained burn, and they put it on a concrete face so that it was in accordance with the requirements of the municipality.
In
Chief?
that particular case, the captain was incorrect in what he said.
Right.
It was still an illegal burn.
Of course.
But
Okay.
maybe this is,
I want to make sure we get that out. It wasn't illegal burn.
but maybe this is what Fred is getting at, and I think John has brought this up before too. So there's, at the moment or in the future, there will be no, you can't burn wood in burn barrels in the whole city. Is that right?
That has been true for 20 years.
So there's an issue with the vernacular. There's a difference between a burn barrel and a warming barrel. Burn barrels are the barrels that you use for burning trash. If you take that same barrel and don't use it for trash burning, but you're using it as a warming barrel with a small fire at the bottom, and there's no emissions, that is actually legal. Warming fires are approved by the fire code and within the municipality. It's what you put in that barrel that turns it into an illegal burn barrel.
We have lots of questions. John?
Just to highlight a few things, I had sent in a lot of questions regarding the open burning because that was kind of an issue in my area, so I might continue on that. But one thing that, just looking at this just now, that's a major change is prior to this amendment, it did not apply to Eagle River. So now this applies to all of Anchorage, so that's very significant for your area. And then, a concern I've had with the open burning is people, it's when you create a fire-wise property, you get a lot of, you cut down a tree, that's a lot of branches and stuff. It's a huge pile. And you got to cut down a dozen or more. And on my property years ago, it was like 60. And to haul all that down, that was part of the woodlot, most of it, but haul it down the woodlot, that's an awful lot of back and forth, and at $15 a load, you're talking, I don't know, it could be $1,000. So a lot of people just want to burn it on their property, and this, basically, the thing, you can't do that, period.
Correct.
Was that the case before?
It's been that way for at least 2 years.
But
John, continue.
The two significant fires that we had last year, the May fire in Eagle River, and then the July fire in McHugh Creek, to provide evidence that the municipality is not in position to tolerate uncontrolled, unmanaged. We don't want Anchorage to look like Ventura, California.
But unmanaged fires like that are illegal always. I mean, in the code, you're supposed to, all the things you're supposed to do if you're gonna burn slashing, that's always been true. So.
It's our recommendation that those be prohibited in the municipality of Anchorage.
Yeah, but they've always been that those are the conditions under which you can do it on a burning day. So our problem is enforcement. People aren't following the rules.
Well, we respond to at least one illegal fire every single day, and they're all prohibited. So even while they're prohibited, we respond every single day to at least one, and it's more than one. But not one day goes by when we don't have an illegal fire, and that's when they're prohibited. So we're extremely fearful, particularly on the hillside, and where Mr. Weddleton is talking about. Most of those locations are remote, they're unhydrated, so the greatest risk is in those areas. And we're saying the community as a whole should not suffer that risk. That risk should be borne by the homeowners.
Mr. Dyson, anything else?
Yeah, I don't understand. So when you say the risk is borne by the homeowner, the risk of getting arrested?
No, the risk of, I have a household up on the hillside, I want to take down 20 trees, there's a risk, there is an expense incurred by that. That's the risk I'm meeting.
Yeah.
That's the risk that they should assume. I have to cut down my trees if I have to, and I have to haul it away and I have to pay for it, as opposed to the rest of the community suffering the risk and exposure or illegal burn that gets up.
But did you just tell me that it's been illegal for somebody to burn some small brush piles of stuff?
Yes.
That's been illegal for a long time?
At least 2 years.
Outside of the permitted
We have
burns.
not actually allowed open burning for the last 15 years. Prior to that, we had periods of time that we allowed the homeowners to call in for permits, but that was at least 15 years ago.
That's about right.
Mr. Dyson, anything else?
No.
Tim, Mr. Steele?
Yeah. I've got a concern in that I've got a fire pit. And I thought the restrictions had to be away from any structures, no overhangs, had to have a screen, had to be cleared at least 15 feet around it, and a charged hose. Is that legal?
This would allow for that.
We still allow for open burns for pleasure, ceremonial. If you're cooking a pig in your backyard, we're not going to come and stop you.
So that's your answer, John. You just got to have a pig
Yeah, you
roast
have to
every
have
time
a
you
pig
want
roast.
to.
I'm absolutely confused now.
John, you might try using plastic
I just
pigs.
asked,
Tinier.
is the conditions under which Tim is doing it permitted?
It's me, not you.
You're better looking.
He's
But
doing-
you told me it's all illegal and has been for 15 years.
So what we're talking about, sir, that has been illegal is small slash fires or large slash fires.
But
What
in a
Tim-
pit,
But what Tim is talking about is a small 2x3 fire used for warming, ceremonial, or religious
Ceremonial.
type of things, not using that fire to dispose of household materials or brush and trees and leaves.
However, I took down
Mr. Steele.
a tree last year, and I'm cutting it up into little pieces. It's dried over the year, and it will be stacked away from the pit and be used as a resource to burn in that pit. Is that
That would
okay?
be legal, as long as the wood was dry enough.
And Tim, if that doesn't work, I can get you application for Church of Pyrotechnics.
Well, I'm gonna have to.
And you can religiously burn a
I'm gonna
fire.
have to put slats in my
Forrest?
Oh,
fence
good.
so people
Mr.
can't
Shane.
see.
Yes, Mr. Constant.
Mr. Weddleton pointed out really, again, that the difference now is that while in Eagle River these things may have been allowable, the kind of open burn process, this amends to change that.
I anticipate a lot of people, once they read this, coming to testify. John?
So a couple things I want to clear up is so the open burning's been illegal for 15 years, but then also the statement's made we haven't issued a permit for 2 years. So what were the permits prior to those 2 years for?
Prior to those 2 years, the permits were for a certain period of time that the current ordinance allows for burning in the hillside area in the spring, a 10-day period in the spring if weather conditions and air quality allowed. We require permits for those burns, and then same time in the spring, but also a period in the fall for Eagle River and beyond.
Okay, so if I could paraphrase that, so burning /falls was illegal except for those little windows of opportunity.
Correct.
Okay, so I had a problem with that is because it seemed like that springtime was kind of like the worst time to be burning because you got dry grass and stuff like that. But we had a sopping wet summer, and I'm guessing all of August we didn't have much fire danger. So given that, can't you say we're soaking wet, go ahead and burn your /piles? And just looking at the risk parameters, not the dates.
That's a very logical thought. Unfortunately, when your material is wet, then you are now polluting the air because of the wet material. So it's kind of hard to get both those factors in the right ratio to make it work.
But perhaps we could. I mean, if you say, okay, you can burn now because the risk of wildfire is very, very low, but don't go over this 20% opacity or Chris's replacement will get you. I mean, it seems like there's got to be sensibly a place where we can land.
Excuse me, but the practical challenge, and we saw this last year, we have a contract force with John C., who works for Fire Marshal Hill. And municipality, as you know, extends from mile 75 up to the Connecticut River Bridge in east and west. And even on what would be perceived as the wettest day, you could go into the wildland, go beneath a pine tree, a heavy spruce, and dig 2 to 3 inches, and you would be in dry fluff, flammable material. The idea that we would have to have rains of immense proportions for multiple days to saturate the ground across the entire municipality, we don't have the capacity to determine Girdwood versus Chudiak or East Anchorage versus West Anchorage. We don't have the capacity to enforce that. And we recognize that the city has matured to the point that our recommendation is, since we have dumps, we have other means of disposing flammable material, that we don't suffer the risk of a wildland fire as we potentially saw in July of 2016 with the McHugh Creek fire. It's just, it may be harmful to say this, but it is easier to prohibit the opportunity for a fire than to try to manage the risk of a fire.
John, I've got to go to Eric, but one last question.
So I appreciate that, but in the bigger scheme, what I worry about is by raising the cost of clearing your land and creating fire-wise structure or whatever, there will be less done. Because I remember when we first opened that, the drop-off point, or whatever, so many people were doing it. It was incredible.
And that's why we promote people working through us in the fire marshal's office on the Firewise home inspection program, because there's actually funding. There's a 50-50 match that will pay up to a certain amount with the homeowner to remove that debris. That's the program that we want to continue to develop and hopefully expand.
Do you have funding to make that a real active program? I'd forgotten
We have
about
up
that.
through this year.
So we were given originally, quite a few years ago, a large fund of money from the federal government, which was fabulous. This year we've run out of that money, but we have been approved for a new grant through the state that will keep this program in place for the next 2 years. And part of that funding goes to the goes to the reimbursement program, as the chief has just explained. So when the homeowner gets accepted into the program, they don't have to bear that whole entire cost of removing those trees and the brush. We will pay half of their costs to do that. just for that reason. It can be extremely difficult to find those funds. It can be expensive. And we understand that since you can't burn, that's why we have the wood lots.
Could you email us the
Wilton, I've got to move
parameters
on.
of
I've
that
got two
program?
others, sir.
We can't.
All right.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Kropp, sir.
For
Mr. Dyson.
For either health or fire, should these be combined or separate ordinances? That is, it seems to me that this is a very appropriate air quality ordinance. One of the few times I've seen where entities voluntarily step up and reduce their jurisdiction and combine their codes and say another entity, we've got redundant standards and another entity can do it. So all that is unusual in my experience and to be applauded. We can do things much more efficiently in this way. And then this other section, which has its own merits and own difficulties, which is primarily focused on fire prevention. Why should we do these as one combined thing? Yeah.
When there are fires, and even these little fires you're talking about, I'm dealing with smoke issues for the neighbors, for the city. It's so much easier. The fire department and I collaborate on whether to allow, or have collaborated in the last several years, to allow open burning, and we've gotten to a point where not only the fire danger is so bad, but the smoke that's created is so noxious to neighboring properties that we just have been working in collaboration, and we.
Sure, I buy it. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Dyson, sir.
Yeah, thank you. This is frustrating and irritating, and so on and so forth.
Well, they're trying to get the smoke out of your eyes, so it won't be irritated, right?
Yeah. But they're right, darn it. And there are lots of folks, hopefully all of us, that can burn trash or slash things and do it very safely and everything, but the risk is so big, there's so many people who won't do it, that we libertarians got to say, go, yeah, and give up some of the freedom that we think we can handle responsibility because of those that can't. I'm sure I can drive 40 miles an hour over most speed limits and safely, but so I'd like to go home. But the PM10 issue is important to me, and we're going to talk about that.
I would like to, sure.
And if we could bump that further forward, I'd like it, but go for it.
Mr. Peterson, and then we'll get back to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm trying to think, aren't we flaring off some methane within the municipality of Anchorage?
Yes, from the dump.
From the dump.
Regional landfill, yes.
And that's legal, that's within the...
They're also using as much of that as they can to power Fort Rich.
I understand.
Yeah.
But they're not using it all.
Not all of fire.
And so that's already grandfathered in, this isn't going to affect that then, or religious?
It's the city doing it, it's okay.
Just wondering. That's for the government.
No, it's Joy I'm doing, actually. Go ahead.
That's good.
If you like to continue, sir.
Okay. Well, just one other point on the fire. We got really lucky with having Shoe Creek Fire because the wind was blowing absolutely the right direction to keep Anchorage from the hillside, South Anchorage, from cooking. It was blowing perfectly for several days, and then we had a huge rainstorm that put the fire out. That lasted 2 or 3 days. So we got really lucky in that instance. That may not happen again. So we're basically down to the last slide of this program, and it's what I'm requesting is your endorsement of these proposed code revisions. And it's who will resolve the hearings and the appeals. We want to eliminate duplicate permitting and source registration requirements, provide new enforcement tools to address citizens' complaints about excess smoke from wood stoves and fireplaces to help prevent future violations of federal air quality standards, to eliminate open burn for yard cleanup and disposal of household refuse, allow AFD permits for some open burn operations, and basically it simplifies and streamlines the air quality code.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Dunbar, and then back to Fred
Thank you.
on PM10.
Fred. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So last night we passed a new food code that the DHHS developed through multiple iterations and working with the public and industry. So my first question is, what kind of public process have you gone through, if any, to develop this? And then sort of related to that, who's going to be most angry at us about this and why?
Fred?
Hillside, Beaver, Birchwood, Kirkwood areas.
I'd like to hear from staff.
Sure.
They don't have any water to put it out.
Yep.
So the process started back in 2013, 2014, when we went through, well, actually even earlier than that, because the commission was sunsetted back so many years ago, and we went through the stringent process of making sure it was economically and technically feasible. And in 2014, we were writing up the code, and how much public interaction we had, I can't be specific at this time.
Forrest?
I interpret that as there being basically no public interaction.
First time.
And people are shaking their heads. So what? If that's not the case, then
We did not have a public outreach campaign like we did with the food code. That's correct.
which, you know, that might be fine. I mean, it's very different. There's not an obvious industry that would be directly connected. But I do wonder if people will sort of feel this is sprung on them, and who is going to be most upset about that. So if you could attempt to speculate about that, I would appreciate it.
Mr. Trini already mentioned it's everybody outside the immediate Anchorage.
Outside the bowl.
And both down the arm, connect them. Yep.
Indianburg, Girdwood,
Correct.
then heading the other way.
Eagle River,
Yep.
yep. Cedar Street.
So what we should do is with the transmission lines, put holes in it so it sprinkles the whole area that way you don't have a fire. Could you talk to Fred about PM10?
Sure.
That's a concern he's got. I'll come over to you, John.
You know, one, speaking of the public outreach, I mean, that's one reason I wanted to postpone this till I think we got January 23rd. So pretty quick, I emailed all the community councils on the hillside and said, hey, this is coming up. You want to look at this? Of course, a lot of it looks irrelevant. So I said, focus on this open burning part. And I've got, most people say, oh, they're good. I mean, I haven't had a community council put it on their agenda and discuss it, but kind of the leaders of it just weren't that worried about it. But that's not all inclusive. Most people aren't paying attention. And what's going to happen is the guy that Dennis goes out and busts next year has no idea we have anything, rules like this whatsoever. He just had trees to burn. I think 90% of the population has no clue. And they're hard to reach. It's a problem.
When are you planning on for this to have a public hearing on it? Do you know?
It's the 23rd of January.
Okay, don't plan to being heard then. It'll be pushed into February.
Well,
I'm just telling you, I know what's going to happen. We'll have to pushing it over. Which are other things? That's the last day we have to get stuff on the ballot. And that takes priority over everything else. So just to let you know, probably get pushed into February. Thank you. Did you talk to Fred about PM10?
Sure. Do you have a specific question?
Well, yeah, so I'm just trying to find that here. Is that the fugitive
dust emissions or emissions? That is pertaining to open lots, gravel pits.
Yeah, I read that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so we're just trying to minimize the amount of dust that's coming off of
So
properties. Yes.
most of this area with the topography as a result of glaciers.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of glacial till here.
Sure.
Lots of places.
Mm-hmm.
When we dealt with this 30 years ago, we thought about court orders against the glaciers.
So it's more heavily disturbed property. So if you have
okay, I got that.
Okay.
So another huge source used to be when we go around with the sweepers and pick up all the sand we put on there.
Correct.
Yeah. So what happens with that?
So our process in the last many years has been to use a product called magnesium chloride in solution, which is a hydrophobic product that draws moisture and holds particles together. So we're using that in combination with at early times in the spring to keep the product, the dust and dirt and everything that migrates out onto the streets when everything melts in the springtime, and then freezes at night, and then it becomes entrained in the morning when traffic picks up, and then in the evening when traffic picks up. So in the morning we also have those inversion layers that hold everything in. So our goal is to keep the product on the ground until the sweepers can come by and pick it up, and after that have a post magnesium chloride sweep or spray, which will keep the product on the ground and hopefully for foreseeable future or until the next rainstorm.
Yeah, so did you say that sand that the city's putting on there has got magnesium and stuff in it?
Some of their sand piles do have magnesium chloride incorporated into it, and we also have sprayers on the back of trucks that apply it to the road surface. There's also been, over the years, the product, the sand quality, or the silts and fines are taken out down below 1%.
Okay, all right. So all the private snowplow guys that have got sanding rigs, are we going to force them to do this?
You know, that's beyond my call. However,
beyond your term of office too.
I'd highly recommend it, but yeah, they're not required to maintain things the same way the state or the city do.
So so you won't be coming, or your predecessors, whoever succeeds you, will not be coming chasing these guys down.
We do, actually, yeah. Lately, the air quality program, in conjunction with right-of-way, land use, the street sweeping people, they're all out at odd hours, and they're stopping people, getting names and numbers that I'm contacting. They contact me, and I'm calling them up and dealing with the aftermath and trying to get them all to get on the same page. We send out dust letters every spring to 150 or so organizations, large parking lot owners. Okay, so
Fred,
we're trying to be as proactive.
Fred, there was a requirement we passed on this some years ago to require people to spray water down on the parking lot before you sweep it up, because we had a problem with people just going in there not spraying water down and just pushing the gravel, and then we had PM10 all over your area and other parts of Anchorage. They're supposed to put water down before they try and move the gravel.
Correct, yes. And leaf blowers are another major issue we're in. So, yes.
And in the rural areas, you might have a little bit of it, John, but you know, my driveway's 150 yards long.
What's your point?
And I was out sanding this morning, you know, and I got a neighbor that's got a far worse one, and he'll regularly put down 8 yards, you know, from his own private spreader, just to be able to. He likes his wife to get to the bottom of it. He's really invested in that relationship.
Well, Fred, there was a time period when I lived in Eagle River. I had to have one vehicle with 4 chains on it to get up and down the mountain.
Yeah.
Then we had one to get into Anchorage.
Yeah, so I'm those
seriously
extenuating circumstances, but anyways. So right now, do you only go after commercial folks, not homeowners?
No. As far as the sweeping of their driveway?
No. Well, and enforcing this. So guys liable to get in trouble for sweeping up the sand off his driveway?
So, yeah, I've gone out on complaints where people are using leaf blowers to clean their driveways, and their neighbors are all being dusted and sanded, and every car, et cetera, gets covered. Yeah, I've dealt with that a lot.
In a circumstance where you can't see your neighbors, hardly can hear them,
right,
there's still going to be a violation.
A warning or a fine? Or both?
All right.
I've got more questions.
In this case, someone would have to call in.
Yeah.
You know,
So where do you live, Fred, so I can call the complaint in on you? Mr. Constant.
Yeah, once again, listening to this guy over here, Mr. Welton, this new amendment that's here does create a substantial change for Eagle River, Chugiak, and Birchwood. A very substantial change. And I can already imagine the arguments that, wait, this change has happened and no one's consulted us, won't have time to go through the community council process because this is January 23rd, and there won't be a time for us to deliberate on this question.
We need 3 months.
And, well, yeah, they want 3 months. And, in fact, I don't have a lot of sympathy for people about fire issues and all that when they say we don't want water, but that's a different issue. We heard that last night, but I think that the administration would be wise to do a bit of an aggressive outreach campaign in that area relative to this question, because it's going to come back. And it's reasonable, if you were given only 2 weeks to review a substantive change of this type, for them to say, we need it to be delayed, and for them to be heard saying that, because it's not 6 months since August. It's literally just came up. And so I think it would be wise on your behalf to figure that out. And if it's actually going to move in February, then you do have the month of January for 3 community councils to say, hey, this is coming. So,
well, Chris, I'll tell you what I'll do. There's the third Wednesday of every month, I meet with the Federation, the Board of Directors. I'll bring it up to the Board of Directors, which will get it out to all community councils. Okay?
but that's
I'll take care of
even
that.
late for
I know, but
Birchwood.
that's better than not doing it, because they'll have a meeting in December. Yep. John, and then Tim. Anything, John?
Well, I think I'm done. I think that outreach is good, but it's also educational for the fire department, because I think a lot of people don't know these. So if you write up a little sheet or something, says here's what you've been doing, because I didn't quite even grasp the stuff, and then tie it in with this open burning changes, and just say we've basically been doing this, you just didn't know, would be real valuable.
And Deanne, would you send a copy of this to the Federation of Community Councils so they can make a blast out to all the community council presidents? They are operation now. If we could get that done, I'd appreciate it. Tim?
So now we see why the state wants to give up its snow plowing or street cleaning responsibilities, but I don't see why the city wants to take them on if they're just going to create those problems and break the law.
We have a minute?
You have. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. I was actually looking at this amendment, and I'm on page 3 at the very bottom, and there's a line that said that pollution control officer of the department may issue open burning permits to include the destruction of timber infested with spruce bark beetles, and so that would be the hillside south Anchorage and probably Eagle River as well. So they actually could get a permit according to that language.
Correct. If we have an infestation of any kind of beetle, it does allow both air quality and the fire chief to collaborate together to open burning again just for that hazard.
And I actually heard a story at the end of last summer that last year was a good year for spruce bark beetles. I don't know if that's true or not, but
Good year. They bred rapidly.
So we might have another infestation coming.
There's a possibility. We've been keeping track, and so far in the Matanuska Valley, Anchorage, and down to the Kenai, there's been very few trees. It's been very slow expanding. So we're thinking that it's not going to be anywhere near the hazard it was several years ago.
Okay, thank
Chris?
you.
Yeah, just with that, you just said one thing, that any kind of beetle, but this specifically states spruce bark beetle. Do we want to be less specific so that it is what you just said it is, or?
Quite honestly, I am not a beetle expert.
Right.
But I think it could be modified to be any type of bug infestation.
Invasive.
Rather than limiting.
We can take care of that in some of the law. Any other questions for some of the members? If not, thank you very much for being here today. And thank you.
Thank you.
Do you remember MTBE? By any chance you were there when we dealt with that? Remember that one? The EPA was going to send me to jail when I banned MTB here in Anchorage because we had problems with people. The feds never cold weather tested it. And they said, oh, trust us with it.
No, that was an issue.
It was an additive put in gas
Make it general.
and it caused massive headaches.
We can always
Some
come back
people.
to it.
And so we outlawed it, and they tried to send me to jail. I wish they had. I could have written a book. Thanks for being here. So,
I would